contented himself with looking about the small, poorly furnished room, while the office boy opposite him regarded him with an undisguised curiosity, which betrayed that this client, if such he could be regarded, differed greatly from the usual class. Young and untaught though he were, he had learned to read the faces about him, and that of his employer was to him as an open book, and the expression which flashed into Hobson's eyes as they fell upon Scott's card indicated plainly to the office boy that in this instance the usual conditions were reversed, and the attorney stood in fear of his visitor. A few moments later the door of the next room opened noiselessly, and Hobson, attired in a red dressing gown and wearing his most ingratiating smile, silently beckoned Scott to enter. With a quick glance, the latter took in every detail of the second apartment. It was somewhat larger than the first, but the furnishing was meagre and shabby in the extreme, and with the exception of a small set of shelves containing a few dilapidated volumes, there were no visible signs of an attorney's office. Hobson did not speak until he had carefully closed the door. Then he said, in low tones, "As our conversation is likely to be of a confidential nature, you would perhaps desire greater privacy than can be secured here. Step this way." He opened the door into a room so dark and so thick with stale tobacco smoke that at first Scott could discern nothing clearly. "My den," said Hobson, with a magnificent flourish, and Scott stepped within, feeling, he afterwards said, as though he were being ushered by Mephistopheles into the infernal regions. And this impression was not lessened by the first objects which he was able to distinguish, a pair of skulls grinning at him through the smoky atmosphere. As his eyes became accustomed to the dim light, he noted that the room was extremely small, with only one window, which opened upon the blank wall of an adjoining building, and with no furniture save an enormous high-topped desk and two chairs. One of the latter Hobson placed near the window for his visitor, and then busied himself for a moment at the desk, in hastily concealing what to Scott looked like some paraphernalia of the black arts. Upon the top of the desk were the two skulls which had first attracted Scott's attention, and which he now regarded rather curiously. Hobson, following his glance, said by way of explanation, "Rather peculiar ornaments, I dare say you consider those, Mr. Scott, but I am greatly interested in phrenology, and devote much of my leisure time to its study. It is not only amusing, you know, but it is of great assistance in reading and understanding my fellow men, and enables me to adapt myself to my clients, so to speak." Having satisfactorily arranged his belongings, Hobson locked the door, and seating himself behind his desk, appeared ready for business. "Well, my young friend," he began, "I rather expected you, for I flatter myself that I understand enough of human nature to know that there are very few who will pass by an opportunity of learning something for the advancement of their own interests or the betterment of their own condition in life." "That may be perfectly natural," Scott replied, "but you flatter yourself altogether too much if you think that I have come here with any expectation that you can advance my interests or better my condition." "That remains to be seen. Much also depends upon yourself, for I take it that a young man of your caliber is not without ambition." Hobson paused, regarding his visitor with sharp scrutiny, but, receiving no reply, continued, "I might add that to a young man with ambitious designs such as yours, I would probably be able to render great assistance." "I am not aware of any unusual ambition on my part." "Oh, no, nothing unusual. You simply had no intention of remaining Hugh Mainwaring's secretary any longer than was necessary. That was perfectly natural, perfectly laudable, my young friend, and I admire the shrewdness and foresight with which you set about to accomplish your designs. At the same time, I believe I am in a position to give you just the information and advice you need in order to ensure your success." Both men had the same object in view. Each wished to ascertain what the other knew concerning himself. Scott, unable to determine whether Hobson had spoken at random or with an inkling of the facts, answered coldly, "I do not know to what you refer, or on what grounds you base the inference which you seem to have drawn." "No? Then you will allow me to remark, Mr. Scott, that such familiarity as yours with a portion of Hugh Mainwaring's private correspondence, extending back over a period of 15 or more years, taking into consideration the facts that you cannot be much more than 25 years of age, and have only been about 2 years in Mr. Mainwaring's employ, would indicate that you had sought to acquaint yourself with some facts connected with your employer's early life, with the express purpose of using the same to your own advantage." "You must see the inconsistency of such a supposition when you consider that I have been in possession of these facts for some time, it is unnecessary to state how long, and have made no use of them whatever." "Possibly," said Hobson, with emphasis, "your knowledge of the facts may not have been definite enough to warrant your use of them." His voice and manner unconsciously betrayed the importance which he attached to Scott's reply. The latter detected this, and answered evasively, "It is sufficiently definite for my own personal satisfaction, in any event." Hobson shook his head. "It is useless to evade the point. You had an object in looking up that correspondence. You intended to make a good thing out of the facts you got hold of, and if your information is sufficiently complete, you can make a good thing out of them yet." "If I have not attempted anything of that kind in the past, would I be likely to try it at this late day?" Scott asked, with the air of one who is open to any available suggestion. Hobson at once assumed a confidential manner, and moving a little nearer to his visitor, replied in a low tone, "Look here, Mr. Scott, that's just why I wanted to meet you. You see, I knew more about you than you think. I've taken an unusual interest in you, too, and seeing the little game you were playing, and knowing that I held the trump card myself, I naturally would like to take a hand and help you out at the same time. Now, the point is just this, Mr. Scott. What do you really know concerning the transaction referred to in that correspondence? I suppose you are familiar with all the letters that passed on both sides?" "Perfectly so." "Certainly. But you will acknowledge, Mr. Scott, that those letters were expressed in very guarded terms, and with the exception of possibly one or two, gave no hint of the nature of that transaction. Remember," he added impressively, "I have an exact copy of the correspondence on both sides, and no one could ever assume any statement or admissions that were not there." "I presumed that, of course," said Scott, calmly. "Now, my young friend, let us get down to the actual knowledge which you have of the facts. You are, I suppose, aware that there was a missing will involved in the case?" "I am, and that one or two of your letters purported to show that the missing will was destroyed by Hugh Mainwaring." "Did I make any such allegation?" "Not directly, but your allusions and references would be clear to anyone having a knowledge of the English statutes." Hobson started, and inquired quickly, "Are you familiar with English law?" "I made myself familiar with your citations and references in this case." "I see. You have indeed made a study of the case. Well, Mr. Scott, permit me to say that I accused Hugh Mainwaring of nothing which he had not previously confessed to me himself. Have you any knowledge concerning that will, its terms or conditions, or the names of the testator or beneficiaries?" "There was nothing in the correspondence to give any clue to those particulars. I could only gather that Hugh Mainwaring had defrauded others and enriched himself by destroying this will." Hobson looked relieved. "Without doubt he did, but allow me to call your attention to one point, Mr. Scott. You see how little actual knowledge you have of this affair. There are others, Mrs. LaGrange, for instance, and the mysterious individual whom she heard conversing with Mr. Mainwaring on the night of the murder, all of whom know as much or more than you, and while this meagre knowledge of the case might perhaps have been sufficient to bring a bear upon Mainwaring himself personally, it would have little or no weight with those with whom we would now have to deal. You know nothing of the terms of the will, or of the persons named as beneficiaries, whom consequently Hugh Mainwaring defrauded. You have no proof that he destroyed the will. In fact, my dear young friend, you could produce no proof that such a document ever existed at all." "Do I understand you, then, that those letters, Mr. Mainwaring's included, would not be regarded as proof?" Scott asked, with well-feigned surprise. "Not of themselves with these people. I know them too well." Hobson shook his head decidedly, then continued in auricular tones, "Remember, I am only speaking of your chances with them. Mainwaring's letters were very guarded, mine scarcely less so. They would have no weight whatever with men like Ralph Mainwaring or William Thornton. They might even charge you with forging the whole thing. The point is just this, Mr. Scott. In order to be able to get anything from these parties, you must have complete data, absolute proof of every statement you are to make. And such data and proofs are in the possession of no one but myself. So you see, I am the only one who can assist you in this matter." "And what compensation would you demand for assisting me?" "We will not put it that way, Mr. Scott," Hobson replied, his small malignant eyes gleaming with delight at the ease with which his prey was falling into his clutches. "It is like this. Ralph Mainwaring and Thornton are prejudiced against me, and I might not be able to work them as successfully as I could wish. But you and I could work together very smoothly. I could remain